Maybe I'm not meant to be in this relationship. Maybe I can't be with anyone. Maybe I'm just not good enough.
Welcome back to Latine ADHD. I'm Dr. Janice Castro, and in today's episode, I'm joined by Chantall Hernandez. We talk about ADHD and relationships and what this conversation can look like within our community. Chantall Hernandez is a Latina relationship therapist and owner of Generational Mental Wellness Therapy. She works with BIPOC couples and adults to figure out why they keep repeating unhealthy relationship patterns and find new ways to connect with themselves and others. Chantall is passionate about promoting growth and healing in mental and sexual health to impact our generation and those to come. As a reminder, this episode and this podcast is not a replacement for therapy.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to talk to us about navigating ADHD and how it shows up in relationships. So I'm curious to you, like, because you have your own personal experiences with ADHD, but you also work with couples and
Mhm.
clients who have ADHD. How does ADHD show up in a relationship?
Yeah, it's difficult. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I think this is such an important topic because it does affect relationships. And I've seen them affected very negatively as well if we do not understand why things are happening, right? Or if that person, at least the one that has ADHD, is not aware of it,
Mm,
or they're not really in tune with what the behaviors are related to ADHD and what are just like other outside related behaviors. And so in working with couples, I see it very differently with men who have ADHD and women who have ADHD.
mm,
Although very similar, it can be very well, I read a statistic that the divorce rate for men who have ADHD is way higher than with women who have
yeah.
ADHD. And I'm like, well, that kind of does check out. That kind of doesn't make sense for various reasons, right? That I don't won't really get into right now. However, if I look at my practice and the couples that I work with, what I see a lot is the no follow through from a
Mm,
partner, right? Which can be very difficult with those with ADHD because the plan's there, the intention can be there, but the execution is what's very difficult. And the maintenance of that and the consistency of that.
mm,
And so I hear that a lot where I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like I'm trying so hard. And then the partner, is thinking, you're not trying. Like,
mm.
you're really not trying, right? You could
Yeah.
do this, you could do this. Because maybe they might be thinking in their neurotypical type of brain, but they're
Right.
not understanding just how much of a struggle it is for the other person who has ADHD.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. I appreciate how you bring up that it goes back to being neurodiverse and or neurotypical. Like if
mhm,
you are the person in the relationship who is neurotypical, you don't have ADHD, then you're going to assume like this person doesn't care or this
mhm,
person is just not paying attention to what I need when
mhm,
it's not that they don't want to do what, like, they don't want to follow through on whatever
right.
it is that's being asked, is that ADHD impacts forgetfulness or
Yes.
it's hard to be consistent, right? And so
Mhm.
I can see how then it feels like it's you and me, you versus me in the
Right.
relationship. And then for the person who has ADHD, if you are in a relationship with somebody who doesn't understand how ADHD impacts relationships, I hear you say
Mhm.
that it can very much turn into the person with ADHD thinking, I'm not good enough, or just starting to judge and shame themselves and questioning like
Mhm.
maybe why is this person even with me if I'm like constantly messing up.
Absolutely. Maybe I'm not meant to be in this relationship. Maybe I can't be with anyone. Maybe I'm just not good enough for it
Mm,
because I keep making mistakes. And oftentimes, those beliefs have come from childhood as well. So they've been
mm,
experiencing that when it comes to like their homework and school, parents. And then now you're in a relationship and you're just like, here's another example of a time I still can't get it together, right?
Yeah.
Where I've tried so hard. And then if they become a parent, I feel like that's where it really starts to exasperate things because they're trying to manage parenthood, their own independence and their own need for like self-soothing, their own need to have their alone time or focus on some of their hobbies, let's say, and
Mhm.
now bring in other responsibilities, and it can be so much harder to just balance everything because everything might seem like a priority, which
Yeah.
is something we're difficult for us who have ADHD. I'm like, everything's a priority. Like, how do I put one thing in another? And I'm just constantly thinking about like everything all at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So if we were to use that as an example, that
Mm-hmm.
with ADHD, it can be really hard to prioritize and then
Mm-hmm.
feel because you mentioned being in a relationship, there's this there's so many different priorities at play and you're adjusting to like being in this relationship and how to prioritize it. But then if you throw kids into the mix, then it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, we have more priorities and everything is important, and
Right.
then if you can't give it your all and remember to do all the things for everything, like for your kids, for your partner, for yourself, it can feel really defeating, especially if like perfectionism
Very.
comes up, right? Because you want to do things
Yes.
your best and
Oh yeah.
accepting that, okay, I'm not going to be able to be at my best because now we have a kid or like maybe some changes have happened in the relationship. So how
Right.
would you handle that situation where with ADHD it's hard to prioritize and
Mm.
perfectionism comes up? So what would you suggest?
Well, a lot of the times, especially when I'm working with couples, I work on helping the other partner because the other partner who maybe is the neurotypical one,
Mm-hmm.
helping them understand a little bit of what's going on for the other person,
Mm.
right? The person with ADHD. It's
Yeah.
not like they're intentionally doing these things. A lot of the times, maybe they don't even have a handle on the ADHD. And so sometimes they'll tell me, well, am I just supposed to accept, like, okay, so they have ADHD, so then I can't say anything? I'm like, no, that's not what we're saying here. We're saying there's a reason behind this. Let's understand it, and it's going to be the responsibility of the person with ADHD to understand what are their triggers. Where
Mm-hmm.
do I keep failing? Like, where do I keep failing, right? Where do I keep being inconsistent? What am I going to do when my partner comes to me and says, hey, how come you didn't take out the trash again? Right? How come you didn't do this? Oh, I forgot. I forgot. And so it's like, we have a responsibility to understand what's going on for us and also have a self-compassion to be like, listen, partner, right? This is what's happening for me. This is why it's difficult for me to prioritize. This is why it's difficult for me to stay consistent and to let them into their world of how difficult it is, right? And then I work with the other partner to have a little bit more compassion towards that, to try to understand, hey, they're gonna need some grace, right? In some areas.
Mm-hmm.
Can this still be made accountable sometimes? Sure. But can we do that in a gentle way, right?
Yeah.
For each other, right? For each
Yes.
other. And
Yes.
so, yeah, so then that helps with the perfectionism because it's like I don't have to feel like I have to be perfect all the time. If my partner gives me compassion, and if I give compassion to myself.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I hear that compassion for each other playing a really big role in how to navigate the challenges with how ADHD is showing up in the relationship.
Hmm.
Because when you bring up the self-compassion, it makes sense, right? Because if that compassion isn't there, or the empathy to be like, okay, I can recall a moment where my emotions get in the way and I
Yeah.
respond impulsively. Like we can all relate to that.
Yep.
And we know that it can be harder for people with ADHD. But when we
Hmm.
can put ourselves in that other person's shoes and just kind of resonate with, like, oh, I can relate to that feeling, even though I don't have ADHD, it
Hmm.
allows, I what I'm hearing is for more opportunities to connect
Hmm.
over how these ADHD symptoms are impacting the relationship, which is,
Right.
the team. The hope is that y'all are working as a team when you're in a relationship.
Absolutely. And that we care about the other person enough to
Yeah.
understand what is happening for you, right?
Mhm.
What is happening for the other person. Now, it becomes difficult when the person doesn't know or realize that they have ADHD. And
Mm.
I've had couples like that where I'm like, have you considered like, have you ever been diagnosed with ADHD? And then sometimes they'll be like, well, I did have some help at school, or I did have to do this at school. And I think they did tell my parents that I had ADHD, but then I don't know what happened with that. And I'm like, yeah, I think these are some things that are coming up. And I work with them as a couple to understand what has to do with ADHD and what really doesn't have to do with ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it can be hard to distinguish, but we can work on that together to figure out, like, hey, these are the instances where you get curious about what's happening. These
Yeah.
are the instances where it's just like, let's just problem solve. Maybe this is just more logistical. Let's split up chores. What's your strong suit? What's not your strong suit, right? So there's so many aspects of like couples therapy. And
Yeah.
then you add the ADHD in the mix, and it can be a little tricky, but it's just more working with that person, what's going to help them, what's going to be a better system for them.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
I think that what you're bringing up with how sometimes people don't know that they have ADHD
Hmm.
is a very common experience, especially when we think about culturally. Like, for
Hmm.
example, I know both of us identify as Latinas, and in our
Hmm.
culture, since there is a stigma with mental health,
Yeah.
even if as kids they might get told like, oh, this, the student is smart but is gets distracted easily or is
Yeah.
really chatty
Talks
in
a
the
lot.
classroom.
Yeah.
Yes, talks a lot. Or if only they
Hmm.
would apply themselves more.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
like sometimes those things get overlooked for a lot of different
Hmm.
reasons, right? Whether it's
For sure.
the grades aren't as severe, so they just keep pushing through these educational systems, or
Hmm.
who knows, maybe it's like a language barrier for the parents, and they're just like, okay, well, as long as
Yes.
you're getting the grades, like trying to just
Hmm.
go along with it, but not getting the student tested,
Yeah.
um, because often when it comes to, like, for example, immigrant parents, I know as myself coming
Hmm.
from a child of immigrants, is that they don't know the resources out there for their kids. And
Yep.
so fast forward to being an adult and being in this relationship, like you mentioned, there could be
Hmm.
some things to problem solve.
Yeah.
There could be things that could work in the relationship that are useful to talk about in couples
Hmm.
therapy. But if you're seeing ADHD in the couples therapy for one of the partners, that is what I'm hearing is important to address,
Yes.
because it does play a role.
Right, because then I have, I guess you could say I have something to blame a little bit, right? I have like, wait a minute, it's not just like, oh, I'm a mess or I'm so messy and disorganized or I'm lazy. No, it's just that my brain has worked differently my entire life and I didn't realize that I
Yeah.
need to figure out a system to work with it, right?
Yes.
And that's something that I had to realize too, because I would be, I could be so organized in many ways. Or like, let's say at work, I'd be like, oh, I'm so organized. And then at home, I would be like, this is my organized chaos, Like I have books over here, I have craft stuff over here, I have all this different stuff. And I like to keep things, right? And so, somebody else, especially being like Latina, my mom is always like, oh, tienes que limpiar, this and this. She would come over to my house and like clean. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, like that makes me feel a little bit bad because it makes me feel like I need to be cleaner or something. And I'm like, I don't even think I have that big of a mess, Like I really
Mhm.
don't. And those are things that culturally, like that comes into play as well, right? Where
Yeah.
as a woman with ADHD, you're expected to have a certain order in your home, be a
Mm.
certain type of mother. Hey, do the dishes, do this. And when you're prioritizing, it's like everything's a priority. But for me, I'd be like, my God, but like dishes can't be above spending time with my kids,
Mm.
right? So when we talk about priorities and perfectionism, I really had to work on, okay, the dishes are not that big of a deal.
Mm.
Laundry, not as much of a big deal than helping my kid with their homework and spending time with them. Will I get to that? Sure, eventually, but I can't obsess over the perfectionism of like, I need to have this place spotless, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
definitely. Those expectations for Latinas, is very much ingrained in the things that we
Yes.
see or that we're told, and so then that plays a really big role in how these messages, even if they're like unconscious, show up
Mm-hmm.
when you're an adult and you're trying to
Right.
navigate your relationship, or trying to figure out your priorities, especially when you're dealing with kids. And I think you bring up such a great point about having a system in place, right? Because then that
Mm-hmm.
way, once you know that you have ADHD, you have that clarity with the diagnosis, then you can start taking steps of like, okay, it's not just me. It's
Mm-hmm.
that I think and learn differently. And this is the system that's going to work for me. Once there's a system in place, and then there's also the self compassion in the
Right.
relationship with each other, I'm hearing that that can really help with the relationship getting stronger and
Mm-hmm.
being able to do the things that are important, not just for the relationship, but if it's also kids involved, for the family.
Right, right, exactly. And I think about how, in relationships, we have a lot of differences. Like sometimes you tend to attract the opposite, and it could be a really good thing to balance each other out if we embrace those differences and we understand them, right? And
Yeah.
that's with couples all across the board, right? But when I look at couples with ADHD, like some of those differences are really extreme
Mm,
because there's not a handle on certain things. So, for example, one thing that I see a lot is like maybe one person is not as clean as the other,
mm,
right? Somebody really wants to pick up after things, the other one's like, that's not that big of a deal. It's not like it's dirty or whatever. It might be a little messy, but it's not that big of a deal, right?
mm,
And so that just so happens to be something that helps me, right, with my ADHD. Or I've had other like partners that they've said, I mean, like couples that I work with, one partner will say, oh yeah, like I don't really, it's not a big deal to me. And then the other one's like, but it is a big deal to me. Like I really need to have this clean. And so that might be one way that the other person's coping, but then that brings anxiety to the other person,
yeah.
right? So it
Yeah.
becomes so tricky. One thing for me is um I would be late a lot, or I'd be like, I have to take care of so many things, and then I'm like, I try my best to get on time, and it's just always been a struggle for me. And then my husband will get really upset because he's like, I hate being rushed, I don't like this, like I want to be on time and I don't know what. And that's something that we still work on, right? It's still hard, but I'm just like, you know what? The way that I cope is just kind of like I try my best, like I really, really do. I
Mm,
try to manage my time so much better, but if I don't get there on time, I'm just kind of like, I'm not gonna stress it out. Like I'm personally am not gonna beat myself up about it. Um, to make sure, like, because I would be like, oh my gosh, oh my God, I'm such a terrible friend. I'm late and all this, right? And then in order for me to kind of work on that, I've had to tell him, like, hey, this is kind of where I'm at, right?
yeah.
This is what you could do to help, right? Like you could
Right.
take, you could do this with the kids and that so that I don't have so many things to have to get ready. And so there's
Hmm.
things that you can do to help the situation, and there's things that are absolutely up to me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. I think that it's so helpful to hear how you recognize that there are differences in couples
Mm-hmm.
where maybe one person in the relationship wants to be on time. Being
Yeah.
punctual is super important to them. They hate being late.
Mm-hmm.
But then with the other person in the relationship, if they have ADHD and struggle with time management and showing up on time, how can there be some compromise or flexibility with that? And
Right.
I heard you mention that you'll ask your husband for support, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, if we want to try to make it on time, what's something that he can do or that
Right.
he can support you in, so then that way you're both able to get there at a decent time,
Yeah.
because I think the other part is like being flexible
Mm-hmm.
and feeling like, okay, well, maybe we're 5 minutes late. I mean, that's better than being half an hour late. And
Right.
so
Right. Right.
yeah,
Right.
and like I honestly, like I just think about how we live in this society that's so pressed for time, right?
Yes, agreed.
Like
Mm-hmm.
every minute, and I get it that it's important. We, we
Yeah,
want to be respectful of other people's time for
absolutely.
sure. And also just recognizing that it's not going to happen every single time. It's not going to look
Yes.
perfect. So I can see how if there isn't that communication of like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I my ADHD will sometimes impact showing up on time. What can we do to help
Yes.
this out, right? So
Right.
this leads me to my next question for somebody who's listening
Mm-hmm.
and who maybe feels misunderstood in their relationship because of the ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
What's one step that they can take to improve communication with their partner?
Yeah, I think first of all is remembering that your feelings and your experience matters,
Mm,
right? Because the biggest thing I see is I'm not gonna explain or I'm not even gonna try to like figure out my emotions about it. I just need to do better,
mm,
right? I just need to do better. Oh, next time I'm going to do it. And we really believe the next time is going to be different. And then when it's not different, we're like, oh no, here I go again. And then it's like a whole shame of pattern again. And it's more of like recognizing that there's some things that are just like you're not going to be able to do unless you figure out a different system. But first, you have to understand the emotion that is happening behind it and understanding why you're even doing that. Like, why is being late such an issue, for
yeah.
example, right? For me, I realized I get so distracted so easily. Or if I'm trying to get ready and then my kids are like, oh, mom, can you give me this? Mom, this? And what about my shoes? And I'm just like, the amount of energy it takes me to get back to what I was doing is so hard, right?
Yeah.
So if you have ADHD and you're trying to communicate with your partner, it's first you have to understand what is it for you? What are the challenges for you? What is the emotion, right, that you're experiencing with some of these things that happen, letting your partner know, I try really hard when I do this. And then when I don't do it right, I feel so bad about myself, or I feel like I'm not good enough, right?
Mm,
I'm not saying this to excuse anything, but I'm saying it because this is my experience. And it's really hard to have that experience where everybody else seems to be getting it together and I'm not, right? Or
yeah.
everybody else could just go and get out the door and I can't do that, right? The same
Mhm.
way. And then second, understanding what are some of the symptoms that are like what are my particular symptoms? Because everybody with ADHD isn't like all the same across the board. We have
Yep.
very similar things, but there's some people that have no problem being on time,
True.
right? And so those are things that we need to understand about our individual self. So me as an ADHD person, a person with ADHD, what does that look like for me in particular?
Mhm.
Right? And
Mhm.
then once you understand that, opening up to your partner and saying, I want to share with you something that I realized is part of having ADHD, because they may not know either.
Yeah.
Right? That's been the biggest thing that has helped me because my husband's like, I had no idea. And I was like, well, I didn't either. Like I didn't either. But once I started learning that for myself, I'm like, I have to share this with the person that it impacts the most,
Yeah.
right? And so letting him know, hey, when I'm going to get ready for something, I already know like I need to probably get up before the kids so that I can at least get myself ready and do this.
Mhm.
This is what I may need from you. Or telling him like I cannot get ready without my watch. Like that's something like I cannot get ready without my watch because I will lose track of time.
Yeah.
Like I have that time blindness where, I thought it was only 15 minutes that passed and a whole hour passed,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Like I can't keep track the same way as you. So those are things that I tell him like, oh, this is what happens for me. And I try to explain it as best as I can. I'm like, it's really hard for me to explain my experience, but I hope you can understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, this is where choosing a good partner comes into play, right? If you have a
Mhm.
partner, we're talking about couples, so choosing a partner is very important and having that partner accept you and try to understand and not dismiss what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So for the other person who doesn't have ADHD, it's going to be crucial for you to understand your partner and not we're not trying to make excuses, We're
Right.
trying to give you an understanding of our world so that you can, give us grace when we can, when you can, right? Or express your frustration if we're not working on some of those things that need to be worked on, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
okay. But just know that some of your words, yeah, they do impact the other person and maybe even more harshly than
Yeah.
somebody who's neurotypical. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. You bring up such important points about that step towards improving communication because once you know that you have ADHD, then it opens up this opportunity to understand how it's showing up in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then it can be hard. It's a process because, like you said, you might be aware that, okay, it's the ADHD. And that also brings up feelings. It's not like you can just accept and be like, yep, it's my ADHD. Let's keep it
Right.
moving. It's like sometimes there's some feelings that come up with like, okay, got to do it differently than everybody else. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to be able to transition from one thing to another as quickly as everybody else. And that can bring up some feelings of just not feeling good enough, right?
Yeah.
And then not
Mm-hmm.
taking like not thinking that it's you, but rather just like, realizing like, okay, it's the ADHD. That's like some self-compassion right there that can be
Mm-hmm.
helpful. And I'm hearing
Yeah.
that it's also important to communicate to the partner, hey, these are the feelings that are coming up for me when this is happening for us. And so let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about just help that person in the relationship understand like, hey, this is how I feel and this is what I need. And then I'm
Yes.
also hearing that for the partner who does not have ADHD, can they be in a place of having grace and acceptance
Mm-hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
they recognize that the partner needs support in different ways? And that can be
Mm-hmm.
really hard because I imagine, and just some things that I've heard with these partnerships where it's one person has ADHD and the other one doesn't. The one
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't might grow resentful around, I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
all this accommodating and support for you. What about
Yes.
me?
Right. Yep. That's exactly what I see often. Like, do they just get off the hook? Am I just,
Yeah.
getting, and I'm like, no, you don't. But you just so happen to be with a partner who has a different brain. And
Hmm.
if you do want this relationship to continue, and you can absolutely choose not to, right?
Right. Yep.
And it can seem unfair if we see it in that way where it's like, oh, this is unfair, right?
Mm.
And that's very common in just couples everywhere. But
Yeah.
I'm very, as a couples therapist, I really hone in on like this. There's no keeping score here, which
That's
is what a
right.
lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping score, like, well, I do this and you do this, and it has to be equal. And I'm like, no way. Like, it's not always going to be 50-50, and that's just what it is,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
Sometimes I'm going to need you more than the other person. And we
Mm-hmm.
have to remember that people with ADHD have a lot of really great strengths also.
That's right.
So guess what? When you need help with something, that's when they're gonna shoot up to 70% and you're gonna be 30 and they're gonna be there for you.
That's
Right?
right.
Because a lot of the partners that I see have ADHD, they're really good with research. Some are really good with numbers, they're really good with reading, they're really good with like just planning even trips and stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
they love the research of it all.
Yes.
And that's what they bring. Like you're not with this
Yeah.
person just because you're like helping us. Like no, no, no. Like we're not helpless in this either. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of strengths that person has, and that's where they come in,
Right.
right? It
Yeah.
might just look different in different times and throughout your relationship.
Yes, I so
Mm-hmm.
appreciate you bringing that up because you're right. It's not about keeping tabs in the relationship of I
Mm-hmm.
do more to
Yeah.
support you, because then that
Mm-hmm.
starts to turn into like this parent-child dynamic of like, I got to tell
Yes.
you how to keep up with your life. And that's not fair. And it's
Right.
also not going to be 50-50. It's not going to feel fair and equal all the time. As you
For sure.
mentioned, depends on the season of life or what's going on in each of their worlds. And
Mm-hmm.
ADHD also comes with strengths. You're right. Like the
Yeah.
problem solving, the research, the being able to plan trips.
Mm-hmm.
Some even work well in moments of stress or like
Yes.
uncertainty because the dopamine starts hitting, but that people
Mm-hmm.
who are not with ADHD are just
Yeah.
like too stressed out to like
Yeah.
think clearly. So there's
Absolutely.
definitely going to be moments where it's just like you said, maybe it's one person does 70% and the other one's at
Mm-hmm.
30. And like even if somebody in the relationship doesn't have ADHD, it doesn't mean that they don't struggle with other stuff where they need support.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Sometimes I see them have anxiety, right? You could even say, okay, what if nobody has ADHD, but somebody has anxiety? I kind of think about it in the same way, where it's just like one person can help soothe the other one, the one who has anxiety, and the one that has anxiety has to work on managing their own anxiety as well,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
this can be applied across the board, not just with ADHD, but I just think, when it comes to ADHD, we're learning so much more about it. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of things that people don't know. Like, even if they suspect, like, I think I have ADHD is what I get a lot, right? I think I have ADHD, or like, oh, they told me that I have ADHD. Now, what does that mean? Right. And
Hmm.
then we're exploring what does that mean. And sometimes because I do my own research and I have ADHD myself, then I start to, talk to them and learn more about them. I'm like, that sounds like an ADHD trait. And they're like, I'm like, does this, and this happen? And they're like, yeah, exactly. And I was like, that makes sense. So then they get to know more about themselves and their partner gets to learn more about them, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's why it took my partner so long to return that Amazon thing that they got, right? Or whatever.
Mhm.
Because sometimes we struggle with like follow through of certain things. Like, oh, I'll put it off. Like, yeah, 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 I'll keep, yeah, I'll get that done. I'll get it done. And then I don't get it done, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
definitely.
of
Well, thank you so much for sharing your
course.
insights about how ADHD shows up in relationships and also what are some steps that they can do to communicate more effectively or how to handle it in relationships as it shows up. Because as you mentioned too, is like ADHD doesn't look the same for everybody with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
It shows up differently while there are some common symptoms.
Right.
So I just want to wrap up by asking if there are any offerings that you'd like to share with our listeners that you have going on at the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, well, I do individual and couples therapy. You can find me on Instagram at chantell.lmft. I believe you'll be linking my website as well so they can reach
Yes.
out if they, looking for support. I'm here to support. One thing I don't do is like assessments because you know how it is with ADHD assessments, medication. I don't do all that, but I have helped a lot of clients try to unpack and find the right resources
Yeah.
if they suspect they have ADHD or if they already have a diagnosis. And I work with couples and couples who are, mixed neurotypical and neurodivergent. So that's kind of where I've landed, not on purpose, but that's actually what gravitate, that's who gravitates towards me. And I think my style and my flexibility
Hmm.
really helps a lot
Yeah.
of neurodivergent folks. So I understand how it is. I always say I need flexibility in my life, and that's what I provide to a certain extent, right?
Yes. Yes, for
Of
sure.
course, with my boundaries, of course.
Yes.
But they can find me on Instagram or on my website. They can reach out if they want to work with me.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, mi gente, that wraps up today's episode with Chantall Hernandez on ADHD and relationships. If there's one big takeaway, it's this. When ADHD shows up in a relationship, it can look like forgetting, trouble with follow through, time blindness, and difficulty prioritizing. And if your partner doesn't understand ADHD or sees it as an excuse, it can easily get misread as you don't care or you're not trying hard enough. But as Chantal shared, for many people with ADHD, the intention is there. It's the consistency part that's harder. And we also talked about something so important, shame. A lot of these feelings of, I'm not good enough, I can't get it together, aren't new. They often get and go all the way back to childhood. So, what helps? Compassion and teamwork. not keeping score, not turning into a parent child dynamic. It's about learning each other's brains, creating systems, and communicating needs in a way that's honest and gentle. If this episode resonated with you, I hope you share it with a partner or friend. And if you're looking for support, Chantall share where you can find her. Her Instagram and website will be in the show notes. Gracias for being here with me on Latina ADHD. I'm Dr. Janice Castro, and I'll see you in the next episode.